Oh my God, they are recording. Please, guys, behave. So, hello, everyone. Let's try to make this professional. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for participating in Summerhill Festival of Childhood. There are many of those here who are working towards this celebration, towards celebrating childhood, celebrating freedom, celebrating authenticity, and the inspiration that Summerhill has been to all of us. Hello, Olivia from Colorado. So my name is Charlie Moreno Romero. I'm a Colombian living, well, I left Colombia many years ago, and around 16 years ago, I settled down in Estonia. It's my second home. My third home would be Spain, where I did my PhD studies. So I would like to share with you some reflections that emerged from that trip. Let me please get into it. So are you seeing my screen? I guess you are. So we have here two concepts which are critical to our world as we see it: democratic education, educating for democracy, and social justice, which I believe most of you believe doesn't exist at the moment, at least it's not fully achievable. And inclusion of diversity, inclusion of our own differences. So this is me. What a nice picture. My mother is very honored, very proud of that picture. I'm not so much. So I'm a Colombian guy with a baby face. If I shave, I will be really baby. I studied philology and anthropology, and I have been for 18 years involved in education at different levels, from public school, public primary school back in Colombia, to international schools in Colombia and Estonia, to private and public universities in both countries, to public schools also in Spain. So it has been like going around education in different fields, different settings, let's say. But there was always this idea, you know, that we cannot be educating for status quo, or let's reproduce the whole thing. You know, this is how the world is, and that's it. So that looking for answers, for possibilities, brought me to Spain, to Madrid, in 2014, where I started a PhD program in a research group, part of Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, that was focusing on education for social justice and inclusion. I have no idea why this is in Spanish, because I remember translating it, but it was really interesting. I started reading about, okay, what are the efforts, you know, has to do with curricula, organization. It has to do with the inclusion of, hello, Ibeke, with the inclusion of diversity. It has to do with making education attainable. But I was asking myself all the time, okay, we want people to get an education, but is it the same that wanting people to have schooling experience, or at least schools as we know them? So this was very troubling, especially because I was in a context such as the Spanish public university environment, in which whatever was kind of private was already very problematic in every sense. Somehow, well, I continued, let's say, learning about this process. But at the same time, boarding a flight, I read about this crazy school in Spain, in between Valencia and Alicante, where they did things in a different way. This was my introduction to democratic education, and I was, to be honest, very skeptical. I had already learned a bit about this framework for education for social justice. I will explain it in a moment. And then these things showed up as, look, this is something that might be related somehow. So in the end, my research deals with exactly that situation. Right? with exactly that situation. What are the relationships between democratic education and education for social justice and inclusion? So I had to go through a process which was not only theoretical, it was very practical. I was doing field work at this school, but having contact with the young people, having contact with parents, with the workers, the facilitators at those places, but also I got in touch with this community of democratic education around the world. I had the privilege, the honor to visit different places about Israel, Germany, Spain, the US, France, I think in England I didn't, Poland. And then I started building on this conceptual framework of the relationship. So here there are three of those characteristics. Yes, this is equality, doesn't mean justice. This is equality, everybody gets the same. This is justice. So it's a bit superficial, but in the end, it makes us think about, especially these guys, how people get what they need according to their needs. So the name in the democratic school was Ojo de Agua, Olivia, the eye of the water. So what is this education for social justice? There are three. This is a framework developed by Fraser in the beginning of the 2000s, and it speaks about three different dimensions of how education can be. You're welcome. Education can be directed to the promotion of social justice. What is social justice? So it speaks about these three dimensions. The first one is redistribution. It has to do with redistributing your resources, services, access to resources and services, the use of them. It can be tangible and intangible, so you don't necessarily have to touch it, or be a good that you allocate in a specific place. It can be very symbolic. There is the dimension of recognition. It speaks about sexual, cultural, identitarian, and professional recognition of challenges as well, if you want it. And there is also the dimension of participation. In the beginning, it was representation, because this framework actually was built for nation states as achieving or let's say pursuing social justice. But in the end, it has been adapted to educational settings. Participation instead of representation, meaning that people participate in, yes, Michael, you're right. People participate in the decision-making processes. There is the exercise of power, but also responsibilities. So this is, let's say, the general theoretical framework of education for social justice. Then, the more I was getting into understanding this democratic education, the more I was identifying the perspectives, how they were actually intertwining in a way. What is democratic education for those of you who are not aware? On the one hand, we're speaking about self-directed learning, self-initiated learning. The responsibility of the learning goes back to the learner, himself or herself. It means that people start having an active role in their learning, from what to learn to how to learn, who with, when to learn, etc., etc. So we are basically opposing the standardization of contents and methodologies from this perspective. Another characteristic is shared decision making. So the people in democratic schools or universities have a voice and a vote and decide on what happens in the school area or in these spaces, the learning areas. This is really interesting because we are speaking about reallocation of power. We're speaking from the adult perspective, a process of an empowerment, releasing power so that other people can take it. These other people might be young people, and to certain degrees, of course. So the second characteristic would be shared decision making. We make decisions together. We decide what to learn, we solve conflicts, we organize events, we make the rules of the space, we analyze together the decisions that need to be made so that the learning space moves on, and so on. The third one is age mixed. Age mixing, meaning the possibilities, the conditions for not only young people, because when we are in the school, we are also age mixing with others, but for the people inside of an educational setting, to make decisions together and to spend time together, to build these bridges, the scaffolding, bridges of experience and practice, to be able to relate to others who are perhaps have more or more developed skills, who have different sorts of knowledge. This is obviously facing or as a response to this fetish that we have normalized in conventional schools of separating kids according to their age, as if that was the only thing that people would have in common, was if the only thing that people had in common was their age, their manufacture date, while actually we have different sorts of learning styles that become supported by other learning styles. And if we think of 250,000 years only as Homo sapiens, let's not get into Homo neanderthales, age mixing has been the rule. So the historical social construct of schooling developed in Prussia in the 18th century has become naturalized as the only way how kids should learn. So democratic education says no. It is actually normal that kids are surrounded by other people who are younger and older and spend time together, different sorts of activities. The final characteristic, in my opinion, is free play. How to promote spaces in which kids can use the tools of the culture, as Peter Gray calls it, and develop the initiative, their creativity, their empathy. Whenever there is free play, there will be conflicts. Awesome. We try to prevent conflicts in schools, conventional schools, but actually I feel that the best thing that can happen is that we get conflict so that people can get into this process, become engaged into that process of solving the differences, of getting to agreements, of reconsidering what is expected from us, learning about each other. So that I would say is the final characteristic, or the fourth characteristic of democratic education, why conventional schools usually have kept academic learning at a certain level, really high level, high standards, social skills and emotional well-being a bit lower, as long as the person is not disturbing, bothering the others. It's okay if they are introverted, it doesn't matter, but the academics are always really important. I feel democratic education is trying to reach a balance in between these three components or dimensions of human nature, right? The intellectual cognitive development, the emotional stability, well-being, balance, and the social skills, how to talk to others, how to listen to others, how to help others solve conflicts, how to solve my own conflicts, how to explain myself when I feel frustrated or angry. So when I got to these characteristics and I was studying them in the field, and I was talking to the kids, and I was, trying to make sense of the whole structure. I was always keeping these three dimensions of this framework, education for social justice, in my mind, and establishing the relationships in between these two. Who defines and control participation? What about accountability in England? Is included? Yeah, there are many interesting questions, right? That I hope that we will address in a moment. So what are the relationships in between these two areas of? One is very pragmatic. You have the characteristics which are theoretical, but they are practiced in the place. The other one is an idea. It's a theoretical approach to how we could promote social justice. So from my perspective, from those 3 years of field work and research study in Spain and while traveling around the world, I could identify some. On the one hand, democratic education assumes this ideal of redistribution of learning spaces, of learning itself, whose learning responsibility it is, if not the learners. Traditionally, in our conventional schools, adults have this right, this responsibility. It is the teacher's responsibility to have the kid learn something. It is the parent's responsibility that the child behaves in the class. Otherwise, the child doesn't learn and disturbs others. In democratic education, the idea is to redistribute these learning rights and responsibilities so that the learner has a major role, not only in what is learned, but how, who, with, under what conditions, what are the materials, the learning materials or resources. There is a redistribution of spaces. There is a methodology of free movement. And this brings me to the Lotze Institute in Budapest, speaking about not only toddlers, but speaking about young people as being able to move to different areas, to get bored, to explore, to try different tools of the culture. There is a redistribution of times. When people can use their time, then they start reconsidering what they want to do. In conventional schools, we have a timetable that has all the time filled for the kids, In democratic education, the idea is that people start taking responsibility and agency for their own learning. So the redistribution also happens about times. Of course, there is a redistribution of power through the decision-making process. I would say there is a redistribution of rights in general. In regards to recognition, we are speaking about learning styles, diversity, how we actually can address diversity, keeping a unique standardized framework of education, of schooling. How, whenever there are challenges, the learning conditions can be rearranged so that the people can develop those learning skills in different ways. How we understand uniqueness in terms of social background, in terms of interests. And then this obviously brings to the surface the fact that schooling, as we know it, as normalized, is nothing but a historical construct. That it's useful to some people, perhaps because of ideological propaganda, because of a reproduction of the status quo. There are really few research studies, and maybe we can speak about it later on, about the effects of democratic education on the people who learn that, who share those spaces. But what is at the moment seems to be clear to me from those research studies in the United States, in UK, Israel, Germany, just to mention some, is that these are people who are not passive, who understand that their lives belongs to them, who understand the value of getting together with other people, and start, being active in social causes, start being, developing this critical thinking as well, commenting, being informed, commenting on what is going on, getting together to establish meaningful actions to change the status quo. So this is very important in my opinion. And the final one is participation. It means that, again, in these environments, we are not teaching democracy, we are living democracy. And I would like to point out that democracy is not necessarily the majority rule as we know it in most countries because of the elections, but actually there are different shapes. At this moment, in the place where we are working, we are trying to implement sociocracy, which is pretty difficult, but still is a very useful, interesting way to socialize kids to democratic practices, listening to each other, trying to find a middle ground instead of using the majority rule as the standard. There is participation of the young people in their learning plans, different levels. I always say that democratic education is like an umbrella concept that that puts together or covers different possibilities within those characteristics I shared with you. So in some places, there is more free time for young people. In some places, there isn't so much free time. We need to take into account the contexts. The more we want to make democratic education available or as a possibility to more people, perhaps the more we have to connect with the local authorities, and we need to play within the system. So the learning plans, the learning trajectories also depend on that. But definitely the idea is that the people who are learning take exercise a more important role in that learning. And then this obviously opens the possibility for vocational and life plans, that people start asking themselves their own questions, deciding about their own lives. So there is this really interesting concept that emerged during my research, which was differentiated inclusion. The idea is to jump from what you see on the left, standardization of I wouldn't even call it learning. It's rather of standardization of evaluation, of assessment of some skills, which are not necessarily the most adequate for each, to actually considering each person's needs and help them develop the skills or achieve the resources to achieve what they get, what they want, what they would like to do with their lives within a community that is accepting, at the same time is setting boundaries, which I believe is really important in order to promote self-regulation within the group. But is to take into account exactly this uniqueness of the human being and trying to help them develop that potential, providing the tools to overcome the challenges that perhaps are unique, are personal. Let me check. Yeah. This is really interesting, Yanaina. We can speak about it. Okay, I will actually read the comments in a moment. So I would like to, in the future, perhaps for the Summerhill Festival of Childhood, I will tell you more about this pilot project that we are having in Tallinn. Is a democratic branch within a public school, and we are trying to implement these same theoretical dimensions in our work. This is a working class neighborhood with really troubled past, and well, it's a pilot, so we are dealing with every sort of challenges, including COVID. But I would like to leave it there. Like, this is something we can speak about more in August 2022. From my side, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. You can see if you have any questions, you can also write to me. Yes, let me get then to the questions or the comments that we have in the chat. Diversity, not only in terms of intellectual, emotional differences or gender, age, but also in terms of migration. Absolutely, of course. Especially, hello, Mr. Terry. Good to see you here. Especially in terms of in very multicultural settings. And I wouldn't even call it in terms of migration only, but in terms of the otherness. There is this really interesting book by Kapuczynski, a Polish journalist, about the other, the construction of the other. Even if we don't have so much migration here in Estonia, we have around 30% of the population is Russian speaking, and you can feel that there is something about the other. So in Germany, we often have sorry, I got distracted. There is a beautiful woman sending me kisses. In Germany, we often have few children from other countries, few refugees and adults from other countries. At our school, we have volunteer from another country, this year from Colombia. That is a great opportunity. I tell you also, I would like to share a case that we are involved in different Erasmus Plus projects. For instance, and one of the topics that we developed during this summer was bread. The idea was to consider how bread relates to different cultures. So we brought people from Pakistan to the school. Estonia is actually pretty anti-Islamic. So many kids were like, oh, surprised. And then we're talking to the guy, he was making the bread that they ate in Pakistan. And it was such a beautiful opportunity for these kids to get close to the other and learn without any fear, without any predisposition. I agree. I find it very controversial that we talk about social justice and we accept that in most cases democracy favors the majority. How can we address this? I agree with you, Janaina. Definitely there is the issue, the framework has been copied from nation states. So the ideal that the nation state will address the issue of social justice in the global south. I'm talking about India, Africa, and Latin America. There has been many intellectuals have been working on the concept of coloniality, which I'm not going to start explaining now, but it's really interesting because it is not about colonialism, but it's about the mental frameworks related to colonialism. There are different sorts of coloniality. One of them has to do with the coloniality of being, which has to do with subjectivities. What is a woman? What is a man? What is a child? What is a gay? What is a black? What is an Asian? What is a student? What is a teacher? So these have to do with power, obviously. There is a coloniality of knowledge, which has to do with the knowledge that is accepted within the framework of education, be it schooling or different ways of education. I give you an example. When we speak about democracy, we rarely bring the topic of civil disobedience to the classrooms. And the other dimension of coloniality is the coloniality of power, which believes that nation state is the only one that has is, let's say, like the natural outcome of rationality. This coloniality actually, as a concept, was developed after the arrival of Europeans to the Americas. So, of course, if we think of social justice and we think of majority rule, there is a contradiction. There are different sorts of possibilities, right? I feel that the community councils, sociocracy as such is a real alternative in which we are not looking for consensus or majority, we are looking for consent, which means everybody is informed about the proposals, but there is a process of taking into account people's not only objections, but also worries, concerns about the decision that is being made. And amazingly, it takes longer, of course, but it works. People are involved, engaged in the decision making. And we are, let's say, rejecting the idea of majority rule as the only way to achieve participation. Losing a vote, hence being part of the minority, does not necessarily constitute an injustice. You just did not convince the majority about your point of view. Possibly, but it's not only about convincing them, because in the end, they're speaking about ideology. They're speaking about culture, what we have been socialized into, the kind of experiences that have shaped our opinions, or the kind of lack of information or information. So yeah, it could be. Diversity needs to be founded on rights. What we need to construct our identities and not imposed onto us. That's true. Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you, Richard. Sorry, he had to leave. The animal and tree cartoon is controversial and ignores our ability to construct who we are. Yes, well, the fish would think otherwise, right? Because if the standardized exam is to climb the tree, it might be very difficult for the fish to do that. Convincing, in my views, is not connected. Convincing is not connected with rights of being a minority and still having your needs seen and prioritized in the same way. I feel that this last sentence is really important. Is not only to be prioritized, but to be addressed. That is like the basis also of social justice, is to think that people are not left out. So in my work as an anthropologist in education, I really connect. There are two issues that for me are critical that I came across to. One was political apathy. I believe it is a consequence of the lack of participation of young people in their own learning environments. And the second one is corruption. And I believe that the whole establishment of competition has makes it possible, or makes it promotes that people are just looking forward to their own benefit instead of thinking of collective. Right? We cannot teach democracy; we have to live it. So this is the biggest challenge. Community and cooperatives is a really interesting case. Oh my God, there are so many people. Why do you write so much? Okay, let's make questions. Who wants to? Fish is born a fish. It is a biological determinist view. Okay, so let's talk. What do you think is social justice, and how do you see what are the biggest challenges in regards to democratic education, if you would like? And I really, I know that you guys are in different parts of the world and occupy it, but if something, if I learned something from COVID and distance learning, is that I cannot live with those names and black backgrounds. Thank you. Hello, Luz, David. Hello, Greg. Thank you for being there.
So, what you were saying, Charlie, about the different types of colonization that happens at different levels in education. And it's something that, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to hear a bit more. It's something that we found the first time in India, when kind of opened our mind that was a possibility, that colonization also happened as a mental colonization of happening through educational systems that are just implemented, and the contents and the methods and everything else. It's important, and later on in Mexico as well. But you have studied deeper about it, and how do we reestablish that social justice at the cultural level when this educational system that has reached these places has become so normalized that now anything else, it seems impossible. It seems like something from the past, pretty much.
Thank you. I would like to open this question to everyone. How do you see it? Let's try to be brief so everybody can speak. How to deal with this coloniality?
What's the question?
How to deal with this coloniality, with this, I was speaking about these three different kinds of coloniality: being, knowing, and the coloniality of power. When we are talking about public schools, for instance, where habits are very strict, they are naturalized.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can speak about my experience in a Sudbury model school, and it was very interesting, especially to see the remembering almost of the young citizens about their own personal power after having been in a school of oppression, right? And it was such a heartwarming thing to see them start to learn that they do have power and they do have say over themselves. So that's what I can share about that, and there'll be more to come.
Thanks so much. Yeah, please, Michael. Let's try to be brief. Go on, please.
Yeah, so I'm not good at brief.
Okay, but, thank you very much for participating.
I agree with what's being said, but I think that focusing on education, yes, I think schooling and democratic schooling is a major part of it. But I think the problem is our perception of culture itself. And I think that we should be getting our writers, our painters, our playwrights, our television film directors actually addressing the issue of the fact that to be a creative, what it is to be a creative person. And that we could define, instead of talking about children and things. We can talk and human beings. We can talk about, being creative. Human beings are a creative species, and all your cartoons should have not fish, but individuals who are creative. So that how do you get up the tree in a creative way might be one way of looking at that exam, rather than, because I think the cartoons that we use actually are part of the culture. And I mean, your cartoon with the animals, I think reinforces the fact that some of us are consumers, some of us are not, some of us are business people, some of us are not. And I think it ignores the fact that we're all creators, and that in a sense, if we become creators through our learning and through our schools, through the democratic participation within that learning, then our culture becomes us. This is what William Morris said. But he talked about the craftspeople, but he wanted, and there's a HMI, a school inspector, in 1918 in Britain, published a book for teachers that was published by the government, that ends by celebrating. It says the teachers should be the people who turn our schools and our children into creators, so that we all own and take part in culture. And I think that would address social justice.
This sounds really interesting, and I will take that what you just mentioned. I feel that teachers actually have a big part of how to call it, maneuvering possibilities. Teachers can address, even in conventional schools, teachers can address critical issues. Like, let's celebrate, for instance, Columbus Day, but let's celebrate Columbus Day from a different perspective. So we can do theater, we can do, history is really interesting from my perspective. Philosophy, we can engage into exactly the development of critical thinking. That is one point, but in the end of the day, if we are talking or we are organizing different sorts of activities in conventional schools, even if they raise awareness, they might be very contradictory with what we are actually living, or the kids in those schools are living. So there is this risk, which I have felt, which is to become cynical regarding, okay, you are speaking about diversity, but at the same time, I feel that if I step out of the school into my neighborhood, I am a pariah. I'm not accepted by the rest of the community. So I feel that it needs to be a community-based approach. And that's the value of I really feel that schools need to open to the society instead of continue being so close, right? So one way, definitely, and I have tried it with students of higher grades, higher classes, is to talk about coloniality. They are, even if these are abstractions, they are theoretical concepts, they can understand what we are speaking if we start providing examples of that situation, right? What are the quotas? When we speak about coloniality of being, we speak about different sorts of the creation of identities, right? So why are women being smashed down in societies, and what are the reasons? And then we can see nowadays, what is the representation in the parliament? What is the representation in decision-making situations? How do we represent women, for instance? And there are multiple cases, that we can address. Gabriel, please.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm allowed to take it to another perspective.
No, thank you very much. Go on.
No, I have a little bit going on from the colonization. When talking about social justice and looking at the democratic school, which usually is like an economical bubble, because I mean, the kids are not working. There is like equal, like an universal, equal access to all resources. So the model, when we talk about social justice, we have to talk about resources and who has the right to get which resources. So, and we already had this talk a little bit. So are we aiming automatically to like economical, social, like models, like the universal basic income for everybody? And I don't know if I can express what I mean, because in democratic schools, there's like, this abundance, and nobody has like to do big efforts to be part of the resources, to have access to the resources. So when we talk about social justice, how do we like, automatically talk about like models like universal basic income. I don't know if I could express my.
I get you. I get you. And if I may, I will try to point out. I think that there you can please give me a hand in a moment. That was one of the biggest criticisms or the strongest criticisms I got when I was socializing my research project in Spain, because people would say, "Wait, but this is private. Ojo de Agua, the place where I did my research, is private. Wait, but that is private. Then it is exclusive. Then it doesn't promote social justice." And people within the same education department at the university, they were totally against even talking about this experience because it was private. I see it from two perspectives. In anthropology, we are talking about the content cultural publics. These are people who develop their agency, take a role, and say, I will deal with the education of my children. I am not going to send them to this system which is authoritarian. I'm going to develop a structure which might even be parallel, and I'm going to start developing different sets of relationships. We are going to focus on different sorts of knowledge. We definitely abandon standardized assessment. We are focusing also on the emotional development of the kids and so on. But this is not cheap. This is expensive as well. They have to keep a house. If they have several kids, perhaps you will go homeschooling, but the idea, let's say it's with other kids. So you have to keep a house, you have to pay for materials, resources. So it becomes at some point a situation in which only one part of the society can afford it, right? There are many democratic schools that have these quotas kind of shape or of approach. So some families, families pay according to how much they can afford. I feel that this is an interesting possibility. The other is, how do we learn from Korsak and get to the most vulnerable areas of society, play the system, and get access to those kids and families perhaps who actually can benefit from these possibilities? I feel that is, we hack the system in that way. We get inside of the system and we try something within the system. My experience is not easy. I am losing hair because of that, but it's really rewarding. Please, Derry, give me a hand here, May.
Just to add to the questions Derek can answer to it, do you think that running a democratic school is significantly more expensive than a regular public school?
Depends on the ratio, but yeah, go on, Derek.
Oh, okay.
But sorry,
No, yeah.
Go on.
Okay, I'll try.
Well, Derry, if you want, but actually, I didn't want to talk about like it's a private school or public school. This was not my intention of this question. But Derry, if you want to talk, go on. But
well, I was just going to make clear a distinction I make because, which is a very broad one and very difficult to be very precise or scientific about. But I distinguish between schools that are trying to demonstrate that a certain way of working with young people is possible. And I can forgive them for being private if they succeed in doing that. But my basic hope, my belief is I think, though I shift about a bit as the years go by, that I believe in state public school systems for a whole lot of reasons that we won't perhaps go into here. But that's my starting point. At least one of the reasons for that is that for the foreseeable future, it's where most of the kids will be. So my attitude to private schools, if they can demonstrate certain kinds of attitudes and behaviors are possible, then I regard them as pioneers of possibility, so that they can provide models and examples that we can take into the state school system. And I accept that it's very hard for that kind of pioneering school to exist within the official world. I don't think it's impossible. And I think what Yakov shows us from Israel, that the democratic, the pioneering, the alternative can very much become part of the state system. And the point is not so much a cultural one, the point is really just an economic one, that until it becomes part of the state system, it won't be affordable by many young people. And I hold as a kind of opposite extreme things like the Acton academies, which are emerging. They've realized that a lot of the ideas for self-directed learning, participative decision making, etc., are important for the future needs of the advanced capitalist or whatever's going to replace its system. And you've got companies like Google who are adopting sort of self-directed learning opportunities. Now those kinds of schools worry me, because you've seen what happens to housing in parts of the United States, where certain people who've got the money retreat behind walls and armed guards and buy some of the best bits of the environment. It's happening in New Zealand now, to shut everybody else out. And if that's what the democratic school movement were to become, I said this to Yakov earlier, it would be supremely ironic if the democratic schools were only available to the elite. There's a contradiction in there somewhere.
Yep.
But I can see this beginning to happen, and I must say it worries me. As to universal basic income, I absolutely agree, Gabriel, that things like that are necessary to create a new kind of society where people really can, to some extent, use their educational experiences to define their own identity as creative human beings. I liked Michael's bringing the word creativity into it, as creative human beings who are economically, to some extent anyway, free to choose the kind of life they want to live, and don't just turn to full-time paid employment for their identity, because that full-time paid employment is not going to be there. In my reading of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, AI, etc., full-time paid employment is going to disappear for large numbers of people. And that could be a source of depression and social disintegration. Or, if supported by UBI and a strong sense of individual identity as a creative human being achieved through their experience of school, if that's how most people see themselves, then we could have a wonderful future. And it's not just a private state polarity, it's what kind of private, in my mind. Is the private democratic education exclusive and not giving a shit, if you'll excuse me, for what happens to the majority? Or is it genuinely trying to be inclusive? And sometimes some private schools don't seem to be quite sure where they stand on that one.
That's true. Thank you, Derry. There are so many things to address. I also see this issue of the characteristics of self-directed learning, of focusing on the 21st century skills as social skills, as divergent thinking, as something that is a commodity. And I saw that in Spain as well. There are a couple of schools which call themselves democratic, but the monthly fee reaches 700 euros, which is not easily affordable to anyone, right? So I feel that we cannot just put everybody on the same bag. I feel that on the one hand, I very much like the distinction in between state and public. I used to make it whenever I was speaking with the people in my faculty in Spain. I was asking them, who supports public schooling? And they were like, oh yeah, okay, who supports state schooling? And they were like, wait, isn't that the same? Well, it shouldn't be. And this is the question, right? The point is that I feel something we are lacking is the production of this research to support more the idea that there are different ways of learning, right? Go on, mate.
Well, something I'm liking about what Wiebke and Henning are putting into the chat, and there's a big discussion here about what do we mean by private and what do we mean by public stroke state, and should we be more thinking about community provision. And when I retired as vice principal, we were moving fast in this direction of community education and to some extent community funding, which actually had a lot of parallels with something else that Yakov was talking about this morning, this new educational project in Tel Aviv, which is for all ages. And that's a genuine community education evolving that's neither private nor public.
I would like to hear more about that situation. I would like to rescue this question that Wiebke you make, which is like, yes, I have felt the same working in public school or state school, and being alone in your efforts, and feeling that kids are also becoming kind of cynical about this whole idea. I feel it is really important to address families, to speak with families, to inform, to share the idea that, you know, we are in a different world. Not only the job market is changing, but also how people achieve information, develop the knowledge. Hello, Jerry. Develop themselves. It's very different. So we need to take into account those conditions. Gabriel. And then there, Jerry.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't want to really bring up the point, which is very important, about public and private. And this was not my point. It was about like the inside life of the schools, like the pedagogical perspective on children. Because when the children are in school, in democratic schools, they don't have to work to get access to all the resources. The schools usually offer an environment which is rich in opportunities, and they don't have to do any specific effort to have access to that. So this is comparable to a society. So in the schools, in the democratic schools, usually we recreate a society model where you have free access to anything you want, which is comparable to a basic universal income. And this is not an effort where you have to work to get something, you know, you don't have to work to get the paint, you don't have to work to pay a book, you don't have to, you know, you just get it. So that's easy to have social justice inside the schools. And this is a beautiful model. But what we see in many communities, and you talked about community work, is that sooner or later in communities, there come up tensions or conflict between who is working more or less and who is putting more or less resources into the community. Because there you have then the potential conflict that I'm doing more than you and you're using more than me, and this kind of conflict. And we don't have this usually inside the school life of the pupils, because we recreate like a free paradise of everything is free and everything is free accessible. So this is where I wanted to put the focus, like on the inside life of democratic schools, where it's easy to recreate social justice because there's this economical reality is like very artificial. So this is what I wanted to put the focus on. I don't know if I can
really it. I think you make a really good point, which is how to keep these concepts and to promote social justice within the school, right? Even if it is, I mean, at the level of speaking about topics, or providing the conditions so that there is redistribution of resources, or recognition of diversity, or you know, the participation in the learning process. That was exactly what I intended to do in my thesis, was to highlight in what ways the work and democratic schools relate to it, right? Well, Jerry, I think that you wanted to say something, and then goes Michael.
Yeah, well, one thing is that there's the translation between American and English. You know, where things often get lost in the translation. So state school and public school are the same thing in American. Public school in England is different, but it has a different definition. So that's one thing. Second thing is, for the people that go into my school starter course, they often will start with saying, oh, they don't want to be elitist. They want to do a charter school or something like that. And then they begin to discover all the restrictions that are involved when you try to do something in the public system or the state system, same thing. And so they go to trying to start independent alternative, but the alternatives that people tend to start that are in our school starter course have a sliding scale tuition, so down to nothing in many cases. So in other words, people pay what they can afford. So they're not elitist schools. They're not unaffordable. And that's true of schools like Brooklyn Free School and Pono and all these schools that we've helped to start around the world. And so that's just the distinction that I wanted to make.
Thank you, Jerry. Michael.
Hello again.
Hello again.
Firstly, in the early 1900s, there were French village schools that were very much like Freinet schools, where I don't think it was Freinet, I think someone else, where they set up cooperatives. The students created their own workers' cooperatives, and they made their books, they bound their books, they printed their books, they wrote their books, and then they sold them. And the children acted as a cooperative, learning the work skills, learning how to work together, learning about democracy as a cooperative, but also in terms of using the profit and then deciding on how to use the profit. So I've worked with a lot of sort of international education stuff. And one of the things I see as radical is Robert Owen, who's the father of cooperative politics in England anyway. And the fact that he set up a school in New Lanark in 1819, and 1819, he set up a school around about there. And his school was set up with two staff who were deliberately not the teachers, the Prussian teacher kind of thing. When they interviewed the adults, they wanted adults who love children. So they wanted children not to be obedient through fear and things. But the other thing I wanted to say was that I put in the chat thing is that there was someone called Earl Lytton that was part of this New Ideals in Education group, which was set up in 1914. And it was the thing was, it was a group of teachers from all types of schools. They didn't fight each other. They didn't exclude each other. They didn't see what they were doing as opposed. They saw what they were doing as sharing and as empowering each other. And I think we've missed that in terms of some of the politics of teachers, especially from the socialist teachers that sometimes I meet. Because they dismiss Summerhill as...
Really, sorry, I cut you. It was troubled times. There were different perspectives that they had at least 2 or 3 of these Congress gatherings. I remember one of those was in Switzerland.
They had a Montessori 1914, they had a Montessori conference with about 250 people. And then they had a conference every year, and it got up to 550, 600 people. And then it kept on going until 1937. But the guy who pushed the law, the 1918 Education Act, through the House of Lords, he said that his vision of a school, which is going back to what you're saying about community, and power and things. He saw the village schools and the town schools as their cultural centers, that the children would research and celebrate the work and the music and the culture and the dialect of their villages and towns, and that you would go and visit the school and talk to the children about the area and its music and its food and its economics and things like that. That was 1918.
Thank you very much for sharing, Mike.
Yeah, we just lose it a bit there, don't we? We were repeating it again and again and again from 1918.
Well, yes, it is. It is. Well, we are short in time. We just got what?
Michael, whose conference was that? What conference was that?
It was a European.
The New Ideals in Education conference.
Yeah, it was the new school. It was 1914, 1918. They had it. And it was
no.
The last one.
They had it 1914, 1915, 1916, 1917, 1918, 1919.
So thank you guys. I just got the message that time is over. I appreciate the possibility. Thank you very much. Hope to see you all in Summerhill in 1 year, more or less, in August 2020. It has been my pleasure. If you would like, we can continue some other time. I send you all my love. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Maro.
Rafael said to say hi.
Thank you. It was brilliant.
Thank you. Say the same to Rafa.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Thank you.